In this video, we're going to be talking about language and meaning, part one. So here are our knowledge checkpoints, which are going to basically be two different topics that are part of three. But in this video, we're going to talk about the first two of both. And then the next video will be about the third of both categories. So what I mean by that is, we're going to look at characteristics of language, and we're going to talk about them being arbitrary and abstract. In the next video, we'll talk about how they change over time. But then we're also in this video going to be talking about language and its relationship to meaning. And we're going to talk about semantics and pragmatics specifically in that area. But in the next video, we will also talk about sociolinguistics. So for this video, this is what we're focusing on. So let's start with characteristics of language being arbitrary. So what does arbitrary mean? Arbitrary, it just means that there's no literal connection between words and the things they represent. Meaning kind of that they're random in a way, but more so just that, the word apple represents an apple, but it's just because we as English speakers have decided that the word apple means that, right? And to other people, maybe someone in a different language that doesn't know English, they would see A-P-P-L-E and they wouldn't necessarily know what that means. It means nothing to them, right? It's arbitrary. So why is this important to us? Because without being recognized by a language or speech community as being the symbol for an object, idea, or feeling, a word has no meaning. And to characterize that further, basically, when we are communicating with people, even if they're English speakers, but they're from different speech communities or different dialects, words that we use, they may not use. So then if we're talking to someone, assuming that they understand everything that we're talking about, there may be some miscommunication that takes place. For example, when I was in Turkey last year, I was looking for a restroom, and I went up to one of the workers that I knew at the place that I was at that I knew English. So I asked him where the restroom was, and he looked at me funny, and he didn't know what I was talking about, and he went and asked him for, some of his other coworkers. He kept walking around. Finally, his manager came over and said, "What are you wanting to do in this room?" And I said, I just need to pee. And they started laughing, and he said, "Oh, yes, the toilet." And on his way to show me where it was, he said, "I'm sorry, we speak British English, not American English, so we didn't know what you meant by bathroom or restroom. We say things like lavatory, toilet, the loo even." And so that just was a moment where I realized that even though we both were speaking English, our two dialects caused us to not be able to understand one another. So shared meaning was not obtained. And that's why we have to understand that language is arbitrary. As an effective communicator, we want to think about the person that I'm speaking to. Will they understand the same words that I understand to have the same meaning? Okay, so now that we're talking about meaning, let's talk about semantic meaning. So semantics have to do with the words themselves and how, what they mean and how they're used in sentences. So language being arbitrary, these words just having meaning only because we give them meaning, that has to do with semantics, right? So we decide kind of what a word means. So there's two forms of this, and there's going to be denotation and connotation. Denotation has to do with the dictionary version of a word. There's also connotation that's going to be more so like what your speech community, what your dialect, what your co-cultures, or even your past experiences have taught you what the meaning of a word is. So both of these have kind of their time and place to be used. One of the things that we need to recognize about denotative meanings is sometimes we can assume that all denotative meaning is the same, or that as long as we use a word that everyone has the same, knows the denotation of, that we can just achieve shared meaning. And that's not always the case, even with somebody within our speech community, right? So we remember that there's language communities, dialects, and then speech communities, which are kind of like the co-cultures that you're within. Even someone within our own speech community may not understand us because of semantics. So when I'm talking about denotation, the denotative meaning, we have to think about the fact that while dictionaries have specific meanings for things, they also have multiple meanings, right? So to lie, well, I guess that's not necessarily the word, but say if I'm communicating, so you can't, try to think of a good word that might have two of the same. Okay, bark, like I have on the screen. Bark. That's going to, even though that's spelled the same, when you look in the dictionary, there are two drastic different definitions for that word. There's bark, like bark on a tree, and then there's bark like a dog barking. So we need to be aware of that denotative meanings can have multiple meanings. And then connotations. So this is obviously the implicit meaning associated with the word. So that might be somewhat like, you know, you might like that party versus get together example that I've used before. Saying get together, most people in our speech community would know that that differs from party. However, if you were to look in the dictionary, get together or party would have the same definition, or in fact, get together might be a definition for party, right? So understanding the connotations of speech communities and different speech communities other than your own is super important. So here for some examples and connections. One of the things, let's see, semantics greatly influence our speech are greatly influenced by speech communities, co-cultures, and experiences. That's really important to know. And so why you think a word means that has the connotations it has is primarily based on your past experiences and the co-cultures that you're a part of. That's why new words, well, actually we'll talk about that in the next video, so I'll wait. Okay, and then there is sentence structure. So one other part of this is also understanding semantics is how you place words in a sentence as well. So it kind of has to do with syntax and grammar. But it's when you would say, I always laugh because my mom used to say this to me or my dad used to whenever I was younger. He'd be like, oh, are you on the Twitter? Versus, are you on Twitter? It's kind of understanding how semantics help you know how to use words appropriately, right? It's not the Twitter, it's just Twitter. If that's even still around, I don't know. Okay, so next. Language is abstract. So language being abstract just means that words hold different meanings to different people, kind of like we just talked about with semantics or connotations, but also it means that that it can be drastically different based on the language community, or not even just that, but how you think of a word. If I say to you, pet, what comes to mind, right? You know what comes to mind for me? A black cat, because I have a black cat named Salem. That's my pet. But for you, you may not have pets, so I don't really know what comes to your mind. Or you may think dog or fish or who knows what. But just saying the word pet is pretty abstract. So abstract, we don't think about this kind of as the opposite of concrete. So effective communicators usually try to use concrete language, meaning saying things, especially if it's someone who doesn't know me, I might say, oh yeah, I have a black cat named Salem, he's my pet. That would be using concrete language versus just saying I have a pet. So why is this important? We often use abstract or less detailed language that allow for unintended assumptions. However, effective communicators do their best to use concrete language in order to ensure shared meaning. So another example of this that I thought was cute was John Ryan the other day brought me an ice pack because I was playing. We were playing, and then he was like, "Oh no, I want to play with that," and he took it, and I'm teaching him, sharing and turn taking. So I kind of looked sad, and he said, "Okay, Mama," and I said, "No, that hurt my feelings." But that was very abstract to him. He didn't understand. So he goes, oh, "Okay," and then ran away, and I thought that was kind of weird. But then he came back. He had gone to our refrigerator, opened our freezer, got an ice pack out, and came and put it on me. Here, he handed it to me, and he was like, "Hurt?" And he was looking for where it went. He's like, hurt feelings. He kept trying to figure out what that was. And I was like, oh, that's so cute. But that is a very abstract word, especially for a kid learning the language. So when we want to think about being good or being effective communicators, we want to think about, okay, the person I'm talking to, will they grasp what I'm saying based on this word, or do I need to shift or be a little bit more concrete in my word choice? Pragmatics. So pragmatic meaning is derived from the conversational context, and it focuses on what people mean. So whereas semantics looks at what do the words actually mean, pragmatics looks at what do people mean when they use them. And this is talking about. The translation of this is implications derived from context surrounding the communication situation. So what I'm talking about here is that sometimes we say what are called speech acts, which are just verbal messages that imply they imply what the listener should say or do back. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. But sometimes we say things and it's not really what we mean, right? So an example of this would be like, if you look at this practice, say that it's a big family dinner. Your aunt has spent all day cooking this family dinner. You sit down, everybody's eating and talking. You hear your sibling get up, go into the kitchen, and there's no food left. And so then they come back and they're like, "There's no food. I'm hungry." Blah, blah, blah. Well, you're sitting eating your food, and then you kind of stop and you're talking for a little bit, and then both your aunt and your siblings say, "Are you finished?" Okay, in that moment, that speech act, like that, what they said to you, that's all the speech act. Does it actually mean, are you finished? Like, what are they really saying with that? They're not really just waiting for you to say yes, and then that's all they wanted to know. Or no, and that's all they wanted to know. They're implying something else with that. So let's take a second and think if we think the same things. Go ahead and just pause the video for a second and think, okay, what is my aunt saying by saying, "Are you finished?" And what is my sibling saying by saying, "Are you finished?" And then you can use, like, say I have them labeled one for the pragmatic meaning. I have it labeled 1 and 2. From a context, I have it labeled A and B. Just put the 1 or the 2 or the B or the A or the B next to each title. So give you just a second, press play when you're ready.